Hello and welcome to If This Goes On, Don't Panic. And I think we're actually working, which is good. We had quite the adventure, we'll say, setting up yesterday. You may have noticed that this is a new channel and a new time and a new day, and we had to kind of figure out how to do this without our wonderful audio wizard, Lady Snipe Shot. So, Alan, what have we got planned for the show today?
All right. Well, first of all, this is the seventh, I think, seventh episode of Quarantine Club. Today we have an interview with Bill Campbell, author, editor, and publisher. We have some giveaways as usual. And we also have Graeme Barber, gamer, writer, and blogger. Would you like to formally introduce Graeme?
Sure. I mean, there's quite a lot that he does. Graeme is a personal friend of mine, and so but he's a busy guy. So I was very excited that we were actually able to line up our schedules to do this today. Graeme, he writes science fiction. It's a lot of action adventure type stuff. I think it's awesome, right? Primarily, though, I wanted him on the show today because as POC Gamer, he does a lot of work deconstructing colonialism and racism in tabletop role-playing games and video games. And so I am really excited to, kind of break that down and maybe give people some insight on the ways in which these things kind of, I think it's a problem in high fantasy in general. And I think it's definitely a problem in the role-playing industry. And he also does a lot of work, advocating for different marginalized groups. So welcome to the show, Graeme. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Okay, so I don't know. Do you want to start, Alan, or do you want me to start?
Yeah, you go for it.
All right. Well, okay, so in particular, I remember that you did a wonderful deconstruction of different settings in the Forgotten Realms setting for Dungeons & Dragons. Now, some of you may or may not play these different settings, right? But or tabletop gaming at all. But hey, we've done video game oriented stuff. We've done writing oriented stuff. So
sure.
If you have any questions, just ask me in the chat and we can answer that. But first, maybe we should start with the concept of what decolonializing is. Because I have learned that a lot of people don't understand the concept. What does it mean to you?
Okay, that's a big question.
I know. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Coming swinging.
So, decolonization, at least in the context that I work with it the most, is stripping out the assumptions, biases, stereotypes, and negative narratives that we have come to associate with non-European coded or non-European peoples in general. So it's things like the idea of noble savages, things like that. It's a huge and complex operation, and there's no real. It's very difficult to sort of boil down into a really quick answer, but that's what I try to do with it. And in doing that, I try to present. Pardon me. I try to present options and alternate ways to approach material that remove some of that. So, for example, I did a whole series on my YouTube channel about the peoples of Chult, and in each episode, I talked about one of the various sentient sapient species that is endemic to the location, how they were presented historically in material, and how a person could take them and use them in a way that didn't foster negative stereotypes or narratives and things like that, and and people proved receptive to it because it added to the story, and it added options for storytelling and for creating things, as opposed to simply creating a cheap conflict using old tropes and whatnot.
Awesome. That's awesome. Now, okay, I think I'd like to get into breaking down some of that in the specific if we have time, but I'm not going to start with that because I want to make sure that we kind of covered the broad topic, as it were, right? Graeme is also an archaeologist, or at least he's, I don't know, where are you at now in your schooling anyway? I don't even know.
I completed my an associate's degree, which is deceptively titled Environmental Studies. Because in reality, it was like all geography and all archaeology. My plan, and I have worked in archaeology. I did, outside of the field school, I did 2 amazing seasons up in northern BC, working on a site, which was awesome. But my next steps will be, I'm currently looking at a program that will let me finish my bachelor's. And after that, I'm looking at a distance education master's.
That's awesome.
Just because I don't have time to run off to go to school anymore because I got the little one and all that sort of stuff. So
yeah,
that'll do it. Believe me, I know that firsthand. And if you hear anybody walking through here and talking, you will know who it is.
That's fair.
That would be the spawn. Yeah.
I feel that.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so my point to that was that your opinion is at least somewhat educated on this topic, right? You've studied ways in which we present cultures in formal study, and I think that this also, okay, like this is a bit of a soapbox issue for me, but in my personal opinion, as a interested amateur, right, I think that a lot of the whole field in that department, right, archaeology, sociology, is tainted by colonization, right? I think that there's a lot of pervasive opinions that offend me, right? Things like, oh, well, monotheism is clearly the, evolution of religion, and religions that aren't monotheistic are primitive, and clearly they should evolve to have a monotheistic religion, things like that, right? Stuff like, oh, well, this culture is more primitive because they didn't use, iron. I mean, maybe they didn't need iron in their particular culture. It just wasn't suited, right? Stuff like, I read a lot about the Mississippi area mound building cultures, and like how you cannot think that is every bit as sophisticated as any high culture of the imperial age as we understand it. I don't, I think you have to look at it from a racist colonialist perspective to not think that it's so involved. Do you think that this kind of thing, do you agree with me, first of all, about this?
It is one of the biggest struggles that archaeology, anthropology, sociology all face, is that the origins of those particular fields of academic study were absolutely like racist, classist, sexist, like awful. Like you read about early archaeology, and it was just organized looting that stopped to take pictures of things.
Oh yeah, what's that guy's name? Schleiman or something like that, or
Heinrich
Schleiman, I think. Oh my god.
Yeah, it's so bad. And there have been big improvements to it. The biggest issues, in my opinion, are that the changes that have happened inside of those academic fields aren't accurately communicated out.
Right.
And
like everything else, it's 20 years behind the times, right? The popular knowledge is about 20 years behind the field of academics.
Yeah, and adding to that is that you have popular media, whether it be like edutainment, video games, role-playing games, popular fiction, all that sort of stuff, really holds on to a lot of the early narratives and concepts, like the ones you were talking about, like the idea of linear progression, where, cultures naturally evolve in a linear path from, hunter-gatherer to like urban city dweller sort of thing. Like all of that stuff, it's super popular because it's super simple, and it makes for really easy video game creation and really easy to understand models. But it's like horrifyingly outdated and doesn't match up with a lot of the way things are moving towards today. And there are still absolutely problematic academics and actors out there who like cling to a lot of these old ideas for whatever reason. And that's not helping the situation at all. But yeah, it's, yeah, oh man. There's
Right.
that's like a whole podcast by itself, could just be talking about that.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
And how it, yeah, and you're right, like all these things continue to negatively affect us. You know, it's the stereotypes about how, you know, certain cultures, you know, they deserved to be conquered because, you know, they weren't as advanced, so, you know, we had to lift them up. It's narratives like that. Or in the case of like when you get into like writing in fantasy and stuff like that, you'll often see that, you know, European coded places will be, you know, enlightened, forward thinking, amazing, have all the magic and technology and stuff. Then they'll go somewhere that's not European coded, and all of a sudden they're all like, they're backwards and superstitious, and, you know, they're not enlightened enough to question their superstitions and all that sort of thing. And it's all just coming out of that colonial mindset that's still there, unfortunately.
I feel you, and I agree with that, right? And you've gone where I was going, which is, you know, do you think that this bias in academia influences our creation of, you know, fantasy and science fiction worlds? And clearly you think it does, because you know, you said as much there, right? You didn't really, you know, dwell on it, but yes, you said that was the deal. And I agree from, like I said, from an interested amateur's perspective, right? So maybe this is a good time to give examples of some of these, like, I don't know, pick anything, pick something from, I mean, you could do Chult as an example, right? You could do Lord of the Rings, whatever you want, right? Something in role-playing games or the, you know, popular culture of speculative fiction, right? You know, what are some examples of the ways in which this colonial, you know, sexist, racist, because it all kind of goes together, right? Mm-hmm. What is a way in which that mindset has influenced things that have become kind of ubiquitous in the field?
Well, actually, one of the best examples is digging way back, and it's something that hasn't been updated since like the 1990s, and that was the Mazda area of the Forgotten Realms. So for your listeners who aren't aware, Forgotten Realms was purchased by TSR from Ed Greenwood, and they evolved it into their own setting. And outside of his influence, they decided to, at various points, try to make it almost an Earth analog. And in the 1990s, someone decided that it would be awesome to have a Mesoamerican campaign setting component to this world. So they named it Mazda, and the writer approached it with the mentality that the conquistadors were heroes.
Oh, God. Yes, I did.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and it if you read the campaign setting, if you read the trilogy of books that were released for it, it's almost a beat for beat narratively retelling the conquest of South America by the Spanish, and it was nothing made sense in it. Like, for example, the gods were basically like it was an instance of research gone wrong, is what I call it. Is where a person researches something so much they forget to make it fantastical in their creation. Right. So the author researched the hell out of different people from South America and Central America, and North America, like the Mexican part of it, to the point where you can recognize Mayan, Incan, and Aztec influences when you're reading the book, when it talks about the different peoples. But they did it to the point where they weren't actually magical. They were just sort of like the mythological idea of what those peoples on Earth were. And then all of a
Right.
sudden they ran into, D&D standard fantasy Europeans, complete with like fireballs, active gods, firearms, and everything. And then
And where were their gods in all this?
yeah, and their god, yeah, that was a whole giant mess where their gods were. And then at the end of it, it made the conquistadors into heroes, but only after turning the bulk of the native population that they were fighting into literal monsters. Like
wow.
it turned them into orcs, trolls, and ogres. So that killing them all would be just fine. And then to finish it all off, in the supplemental games that they came out with for it, they cast one of the Forgotten Realms gods, Helm. They put his church in as a equivalent to the Catholic Church, so they were going around destroying everything. There were literal like slave plantations in all but name set up, and all of the European coded peoples that were there were all neutral in alignment. That none of them were evil. Even when it made notes that they were like they would feed servants to their dogs for like petty theft. Apparently that's not evil.
Wow. So I've heard a lot of discussion about the alignment system in Dungeons and Dragons, but in all of those discussions, I'm pretty sure that would fall into evil.
Yeah. And so it was an incredibly colonialist perspective on everything that went into that campaign setting. And it just, it was awful. Like every narrative was there. Like evil savage natives, a few noble savage natives who, got on the right side. Heroic heroic colonists arriving and, civilizing this. Yeah, it was all there. And it was just like, it was weird to read back then because you're so used to reading about D&D characters being heroes. And you're reading about them doing all these demonstrably awful things. And
yeah,
it was okay. And then, yeah.
I was going to say, aside from the horrifically racist parts, it also sounds kind of boring, too, because why would you want these people with all this magic and stuff to fight people who don't have magic and stuff? Like, I mean, like, the conflict is just so one-sided. Even just from a purely, writing perspective, it doesn't make sense at all.
There weren't even any significant monsters in Mazca. Like, there were... I think they created a handful of unique monsters for the region and called it a day. There was no reason to adventure there whatsoever after you participated in the conquest of the place, and then there was no rebellion, resistance, or anything else afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I've always been very interested in the Mesoamerican cultures, so I glanced through this book, right? I was very excited about it when it first, when I first became aware of it. I'm not sure that that's when it first came out, but I flipped through it briefly and went, yeah, no, right? Because I could tell that it was all like that. I'm glad that you've done a much more detailed unpacking because I was immediately like, well, yeah, exactly. Why would you adventure here? How are the conquerors the good guys? That's a problem. In part, I think that's influenced by, in my opinion, right, as I don't know what the religions are of the people who originally designed Dungeons and Dragons and did a lot of the work on it, but as a pagan, it all seemed to me that the original interpretation of the alignment system was very Judeo-Christian biased, right? And that I think that to some degree that's a carry-on. Like, I've never liked Helm as a deity. I'm like, this guy's an asshole.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, to put perspective on it, Gary Gygax is on the record as endorsing the actions of a U.S. cavalry officer who conducted a massacre as being lawful good.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. Yeah.
Maybe
So-
this is a bit like Lucasfilm, right? He, doesn't realize the implications of their own creation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I you brought something up pretty recently, Graeme, just yesterday, in fact, that I was reading on Twitter. You were talking about biogenesis and an article D&D had put out about how they're going to stop basing so much on race. Can you talk a little bit about the biogenesis and what they're doing and your issues with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just found that so interesting.
Yeah, the term is it's a bioessentialist. And it was bioessentialism is a branch of essentialism, and the idea of it is that you are the sum of your parts equals what you can actually be and achieve in life. It's a very old sort of like the blood will tell concept of genetics, behavior, social status, all that. So it's all tied very much into like very early sociology when many people were trying to prove that poor people deserve to be poor and were just like vulgar and violent by nature sort of thing.
Right.
And D&D has been predicated on that since day one. And you see it, you mentioned the alignment system earlier, and that is where that was one of the largest aspects of it is, it's, all orcs are evil, all drow are evil, all X is evil, all X is good, all that sort of thing. And on top of that, there's, throughout the books, there's the conflation of cultural and biological traits. So, if you go off of a standard elf, it's the whole, all elves have night vision, but all elves also know how to use long swords and longbows.
Right.
Like one of those things, night vision, that's a biological trait. That's just part of being an elf. The other two are cultural things, specific to elves who prefer long swords and longbows sort of deal. Or, if you dig back, it's things like dwarves being able to tell the quality of stonework and the grade of the ground.
Right.
Based on their dwarfishness. So it was things like that. And the announcement that Wizards made, and this is after a lot of pushing and a lot of noise making by a lot of us, and the recent release, like credit where credit is due. I can't remember the name, but a group recently released on DM's Guild a book that split the conventional D&D races into like a species and culture sort of thing.
Cool. I'll have to look for that.
So you can mix and match a little more freely. And the release that they made was that they were going to be moving on to a model like that.
That's cool.
They were going to be delinking inherent alignment and inherent like cultural traits and things like that from the playable races. And like everything else after that was pretty much just, it was speculation on my part on how they would do it or how they could do it and do it well. And then it was an examination of like the knock-on effects of it, because all of the standard campaign settings the D&D has had up to this point have all been built around this essentialism, like this bioessentialism. Like, we know all orcs are evil, and we know all goblins are evil, and they can't develop, complex societies, and they can't do this, and they can't do this. And all of a sudden, that's being removed. And so it makes all these worlds more unstable, because now there's more, why are they like this? Going on.
I always disliked that whole trope of, okay, so the paladins, a couple experience points shy of the next level, so they're going to go find some random kobolds to murder because they're kobolds and they're evil. You know, like, you'll be happy to know, by the way, since we had a conversation on this subject, like, I don't know, a couple years ago now, right, that the game systems we're trying to design around the worlds that we're creating, Aaron and I mean, right, nice. Is based on that, right? We've got a couple of very simple racial traits, like a +1 or 2 to a couple stats, right? And then we've got cultural traits, which are race, they're not utterly not race dependent, right?
Yeah.
If you grew up in that area, then you get, say they value magic, you might get a bonus to spellcraft because your culture just knows more about it. So that's what we were listening, right? And
Nice.
I think that I think that's the way to go. I think that's the only way we're going to have inclusive fantasy in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Like things need to change, and they've been changing and evolving in other games and stuff like that. But like D&D is the largest and most popular RPG out there. It's one like if I tell someone's like, hey, like I want to play I don't know, heavy gear, maybe 1 in 1,000 people might know what that is. Or if I say, hey,
Right.
let's all go play Traveler or Mage the Ascension. Again, like like a small handful of people might know that. But if I say, hey, let's fire up some D&D, there's instant recognition from most people now, just because of the amount of penetration it's had into popular culture.
The Dungeons and Dragons players' books tend to consistently top the fantasy category on Amazon. They're always the #1 bestseller, right? And that's another soapbox issue about, can we make gaming books its own category, please, so that fantasy writers might actually have a chance to make the top 10? But
Yeah.
but it's a thing, right? So you're right. It's ubiquitous. Everybody knows what it is. It's a standard part of popular culture now. So it's important, like Dungeons and Dragons in particular does, right? Because they're kind of setting the standard for the rest of the industry.
Exactly. And not just like the standard for the rest of the industry, but from my perspective, it's the anchoring that people get coming into the hobby and like into enjoying fantasy or science fiction and stuff like that. Because if they come into it and it's anchored on all these like negative stereotypes, negative narratives, the use of what's it called there, the use of real world stereotypes that we use to apply to people to their detriment in real life being used for fantasy races in game, like all that sort of thing. It makes it harder, or it makes it harder to get those things out of the culture and out of gaming, because people are just like, well, this is just how it is, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're running up to about halfway through the hour. Graeme has an excellent blog. I'm putting the link in the chat now. For those who are listening on the podcast later, it will be POCgamer.com. And you can read, he's done some brilliant articles on the subject. He actually directly got Wizards of the Coast's attention, right? They featured him on their podcast or their Twitch stream at some point. If you look up Graeme Barber on Twitch, you can find the interview. And before we switch over to Bill here, you also create worlds on World Anvil, right? Which is awesome. We've been talking a lot about World Anvil in the past little while. Right? Yeah. We can find links on your site there for those, right?
Yes, I have several. I believe I have a World Anvil link, and if I don't, I will have one soon.
Okay.
I have several of my worlds are public on there right now, and I'm going to be they're starting another one fairly soon to match the game that I wrote for the Swimming Jam on itch.io. So that should be pretty fun.
Awesome. And you also have a Patreon, correct?
I do.
And the address for that is, so I can put it in the chat.
I think it's patreon.com/POC Gamer.
Okay, I was just making sure that it actually was. I follow you there anyway, so.
Yeah. I think I'll almost like quick coffee, all that. It's all POC Gamer.
All right.
Okay,
awesome.
Graeme, you have a choice to make now. You can stick around and talk to Bill with us, or if you have to leave, you have to answer a question first. So it's kind of up to you. You still have to answer the question no matter what, but you can,
fair enough.
Stay.
I'll hang out and talk with Bill. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So now our next guest here is Bill Campbell. Bill Campbell is the author of Sunshine Patriots, My Booty novel, and the anti-racism satire Coontown Killing Caper. Along with Edward Austin Hall, he co-edited the groundbreaking anthology Mothership, Tales from Afrofuturism and Beyond. He also co-edited stories for Chip, a tribute to Samuel R. Delany with Nisi Shaw, Future Fiction, New Dimensions in International Science Fiction and Fantasy with Francesco Verso, who we should get on one of these days, by the way.
We totally should.
APB, Artists Against Police Brutality with Jason Rodriguez and John Jennings. His Afrofuturist spaceploitation graphic novel, Bad Mothers, with David Bram and Damian Duffy, was released in 2019. And his historical... I'm getting tongue-tied here. His historical graphic novel with Bizan Kodabenda, which I'm sure I screwed up. I apologize for that. The Day the Klan Came to Town will be released by PM Press in 2021. And that's something I want to talk to you about, Bill. Bill lives in D.C., where he spends his time with his family and helms Rosarium Publishing. So, welcome, Bill.
Hey, what's going on? Am I on?
Hey, you're on.
Okay, cool. Hey, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Oh, it's going. It's going. The daycare is finally opened up on Monday, so things are a little less stressful.
Sweet release.
I tell you, man, nothing makes you feel old like chasing a 3-year-old around all day.
Oh God. I know it, man. I know it.
Yes.
Yes, Graham knows. I remember I felt old at 19 when I was doing that. So
well, I'm 50, so
you are a braver man than I.
I love it. What can I say?
Yeah. I'm currently watching Avatar with my kids, and we're playing The Witness right now. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that video game, but it's kind of like a puzzle game. But he's 7. The 4-year-old just kind of watches.
I'll check it out.
Oh, it's good stuff. So, Bill, you and I first met at ReaderCon. Actually, we met at the Nebulas in 2018. But you were very busy, and I know Pittsburgh is where you're from, and so I know you went and visited family. So we didn't have a chance to talk much, but we really had a chance to talk at ReaderCon for the first time, and you kind of like gave me your whole life story. So if anybody wants to hear about that, you can go back to my old podcast, Alan and Jeremy versus Science Fiction, and that was the July 25th, 2019 episode. So it's been almost a year.
It's like heartrending. Yeah, it's like heartrending yet inspirational. So definitely check it out.
Oh my God, Bill, you have
that was a joke.
Well, let me tell you what, he's joking, but his career and life have just been crazy and interesting. And someday someone needs to do a bio of you, Bill. Seriously, I'm not kidding.
I hope I'm dead.
Yeah, seriously. I would never want to read a bio about me either.
Yeah.
Oh God.
What's going on?
So, really interested in bringing you on because if people couldn't tell from the names of a lot of your books, you're all about resistance, right? You're all about pushing back on the mainstream with your fiction and the authors that you promote. In fact, our last episode of Quarantine Club, we had Barrett Ellingson on, who is one of your authors.
Yes. I guess so. I used to say, well, I guess I'll probably still say it since I'm about to say it, that if your presence is neither expected nor wanted, then your very presence is a political statement. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah.
I don't really necessarily think of myself as like resistance as in like I got a beret and I'm smoking hand-rolled cigarettes with the French underground or anything like that. But I guess in a lot of ways, just by pursuing the interests that I have, that those things are a form of resistance. I mean, of course, like APB was against police brutality, so that obviously is something. And Coontown was definitely a reaction to my agent at the time telling me I wasn't ghetto enough. Right. Which, I mean, Alan, Carnegie, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have had a chance to be ghetto anywhere in Carnegie. But yeah, so I guess so in a lot of ways, yeah. And I think that focusing on the different stories and the different people that we focus on is a form of resistance too, because, when I first started and still to this day, a lot of those voices just aren't heard in mainstream culture.
Too true.
I mean, it's
Absolutely.
like, Ink, Sabrina Vervilius's Ink, that's an immigration dystopia. And, when it first came out, nobody, which we didn't come out with it first. But, people didn't want to hear about that. They thought, oh, that's an interesting idea. America turning against its immigrants. Ha ha, that would never happen. But, by the time that we re-released it, people were like, oh, wow, okay.
Yeah.
I've got to say the past 4 years, there's a lot of stuff that has happened in real life that if I had tried to submit it to my editor, I would have been told, no, your bad guy's too evil. This is unrealistic. What motivates these people? And I'm going to tell them to piss off from now on, because clearly real life has proven that some people just do horrible shit for no good reason. And that's just the way they are. I don't know. I mean, yeah.
Well, I mean, it is kind of hard to wrap your head around that somebody would. I mean, it's sort of like we're watching people whose only job in life is to do evil shit.
Yes.
Like they didn't even eat breakfast. They just get up in the morning and do evil shit and just look all day. You're oh wait, let me go run across the street and kick that cat. You're like, what the hell? I was thinking about it the other day when remember after September 11th, there were a bunch of earnest journalists talking about, well, this is the death of irony now, and you're like, just wait, I'm still around. But I was sitting there thinking, the last 4 years, at least for a while, is going to just bring about a quiet death of dystopia, because you can't make this shit up, right?
Yeah.
Your villain isn't going to be evil enough.
I keep saying this is the cyberpunk dystopia we tried to warn you about.
Oh yeah, definitely. But some people used it as an instruction manual.
I guess they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, they did. So I think, I can't even say, one of your pieces of work is more relevant than the other at this point. It's kind of crazy, but I did really want to talk about the Apb Anthology specifically.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little background on that and tell us about some of the artists and authors?
Well, remember the night when the Staten Island DA said that they weren't going to prosecute over Eric Garner's death?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I was just absolutely beside myself. It's not because, I've been black for a while, so it wasn't like a complete surprise, but at the same time, you're just like, what do you need to do? It wasn't like the Rodney King thing. It wasn't like this grainy footage that could be left up to, interpretation. This was right in your face.
Yeah.
There was no wiggle room around that. And yet they created wiggle room. And so I was just angry and I called up John Jennings because unfortunately for him, I mean, the man's a saint. Buy all his books. Even ones that we don't think are him. Because, he's my go-to, I'm about to lose my mind, I need to scream at somebody. And while I was screaming at John, not at him, but, I was just like, we got to do something. I don't care. We need to come out with something. I don't know. We'll call it APB, Artists Against Police Brutality. We just need to do something. And he's like, okay. And then
Awesome.
I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that was an idea. So then I got off the phone with him, and I called up Jason Rodriguez. And you got to admit, I got to tell you, all three of us were screaming. It wasn't a night where people were, yawning or, looking for things to do. Like people were just like losing their minds. And I called up Jason, and probably before I even finished my question, he's like, "Yep, let's do it." So that was
awesome.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was funny because, publishing has schedules and all this other stuff. And, we're dealing with stuff like 18 months out. And suddenly we just all three had a project on our hands that none of us had scheduled for. So it was a really weird project because, we didn't have a design or set goal or anything. We just were like, we just have to do it. And so, we called out, emailed folks, and I think we had some sort of call for submissions. I'm not sure. People that we knew, friends and all that stuff. Because it was a really awkward thing, 6 years ago to say, like, we're going to come out against police brutality, right?
Yeah.
Like, it was just like a lot of people just didn't want to touch it. Which is funny now, right? But then,
yes, I was going to say that actually.
Yeah, but then you had to tread really lightly, I mean, especially because we weren't terribly well known. Most of us, very very few people knew what Rosarium was, unless they knew about Mothership. Jen and Jason had a lot of friends, but also it was just sort of like it was just a touchy subject. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we ended up putting it together. It was weird because all three of us were on the road all the time. So it was really hard for us to have like editorial meetings because nobody was home. I remember one time we were trying to get Jason, and he was like in Paris doing a talk at the American consulate in Paris. And you're just like, really? Like, this is just this is just getting more and more ridiculous. So it was really hard to technically put it together. It was hard asking people to do stuff. There were a lot of people who were just dead set on doing it. There were people who talked a good game, but just really didn't want to put their name on stuff like that, something like this. And that's how. And then when it came out, it was resoundingly ignored, right? Like people just didn't want to touch it. Then we had like one left-wing magazine do something, and then Celeste Headley, who had a public radio show in Georgia, they did a segment on it, which I couldn't be on, which was funny. Well, because I worked for Congress at the time.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I didn't want them to connect that Bill Campbell, who is speaking out against police brutality, is the Bill Campbell on Uncle Sam's payroll.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah.
So it was very funny, but yeah. In fact, now people are right. It's been written about more now in this past week than it was when it came out.
Huh.
Sometimes stuff like that happens, right? Its time just hadn't come yet where people were ready to engage with the topic, I guess. Right. And now we are. And I think it's a topic that's long overdue, obviously. Right. I've been
about 270 years, maybe. Yeah.
Exactly.
Somewhere around there. I don't know.
Way overdue. Right. Now people, I've got to say there's a cynical part of me too that's going, okay, right? Because with all the protests that have been happening, now we're starting to see this effect of police brutality on people like journalists, right? White people, right? And all of a sudden now people care, right? And the whole, popular culture has shifted on this. Prior to that, you could not get the media to give this issue the time of day. Whatever thin excuse the police had for whatever happened was accepted as gospel, right? And now people are like, no. And part of the reason for that is that, because of the protests, this is expanded. And, in a way that makes me, I'm glad we're engaging with the issue, but it makes me very sad too, right? Like that it took that it, the media themselves had to be attacked. They couldn't just, put together that, with all these different stories of different people from all different walks of life, and it didn't matter what they did or did not do, they were still being beaten and killed and, now we're talking about it, right? I don't know. Does that piss you off like it pisses me off? It makes me very angry.
Well, I mean, I would say in this particular topic, it's sort of like, I guess, after the 60s and stuff, instead of attacking racism as a systemic issue, they were like, oh, what's in your heart, right? So you have, like, the Jeffersons and George saves a Klansman from having a heart attack, but he's still a racist. So they're able to deflect the actual issue by making it sort of like a personal thing. So here, when it comes to police brutality, right, they've been able to take this systemic issue that actually affects everybody and been able to racialize it. So a lot of people were given that space to like not give a shit because it only happens to black people. Mm-hmm. But they kill white people every day. I mean, they kill about 1,000 people a year, right? And you look at so we have like 330 million people in this country, right? About 15,000 people a year are killed, right? So we're not necessarily as violent as we imagine ourselves to be. The police, there are about 50 police who get killed by citizens every year. They kill about 1,000. Now, there are only about 800,000 police officers in this country, and they kill like 1,000 people. Like, they are the deadliest force in America. They're like deadlier than the people that they're supposed to police.
Absolutely.
But since they've been able to racialize this, I guess white people think of the white people who die at police hands as like collateral damage to maintain the status quo. So that's always been infuriating, as just every other thing that happens on a day when you're brown in America. But it is kind of interesting that maybe at some point, maybe white people will start thinking that they don't want to be collateral damage, that maybe being white isn't that great after all. Mm-hmm. But we'll see. Ever since they invented whiteness, it's been a really powerful weapon. That's actually used against everybody.
Absolutely.
It's used against everybody, but people just don't want to think about it that way.
Absolutely.
A very good point, right? Invented whiteness is a good way to put it, right? Yeah, it's nonsense, of course.
Well, that's what the Klan book is about. I mean, I know you're going to want to talk about that later, but that's what the Klan book is about, basically.
Well, let's talk about it now.
Sure, let's do it.
So you have a new comic coming out called The Day the Klan Came to Town.
Yeah.
Right.
So
you told me the backstory a little while back. So why don't you kind of share that, and then whatever you would like to about that comic.
All right. Well, last Easter, my brother and I were the family got together for Easter at my mom's in West Mifflin. And my brother and I were just kind of talking about, well, not last Easter, Easter 2019. And my brother and I were just talking about, like, all the weird, bizarre things that happen in Pittsburgh that they never teach us in school. Mm-hmm. So, we were talking about, how Pittsburgh itself burned down, like the entire city burned down in the 1800s. And then I was talking about the Denora poison gas afternoon. Do you know about that?
I don't know about that one.
Basically, this poison, one afternoon in like the 40s in Denora, this gas escapes from a smelter and kills 14 people in town.
Huh.
Yeah.
And it's just, Denora is known as kind of a working class, kind of like steel.
Yeah.
Steel kind of part of the town.
Yeah, that's where Stan Musial's from.
Yeah.
Or Stush, right? And then with that, my brother was like, oh yeah, like the Klan rally that happened in Carnegie. And I was just like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, because I grew up there, and I'm like, I have no clue what you're talking about. So anyway, in 1923, so for people who don't know, Carnegie is European ethnically very mixed. It's full of European names you can neither spell nor pronounce. Mm-hmm. So in 1923, the Klan decided to come to Carnegie, this really small town, And it was a mining and steel town at the time. Like literally the entire town was a mine. like the town is built on a mine.
Yeah, that's actually a common problem in Pittsburgh. There's just a side note for those that don't live in Pittsburgh. When you buy a house here, you actually have to like make sure the house isn't on top of a mine and stuff. And if it is, you have to have certain things done. Anyway, Go ahead.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Weird, right?
That's exactly what we had to do when we lived in Carnegie. Yeah. When we built a house, you had to have like special foundations because you're on top of mine. Anyway, exactly. So they decided to come to Carnegie because not only is Carnegie full of like all these immigrants, but it has 2 Catholic churches. Actually, it had more than 2 Catholic churches. It had a bunch, but that's the street that they went down. So anyway, the Klan comes. There's about a town of 3,000 people. Half of them are Protestant, and so 30,000 Klansmen from around the entire area, as far as flung as Maryland and Kentucky, all throughout Pittsburgh, all throughout Pennsylvania, came to Carnegie to have this Carnegie Day with a K, because that's what they do, and just take over the town. And the funny thing was that these immigrants that they were going to terrorize decided, like, nah, we're not going to have that. So all throughout the day, they're ripping up cobblestones from the streets. They're like ripping off like fencing and stuff like that. And the Klan decides to come down this one road that had 2 churches, one that I went to because I went to Catholic school in Carnegie. And they just marched on the town, and the town fought back. And it was just like this multi-ethnic, multiracial kind of everybody fights the Klan.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
Good sense. Good policies.
Yeah.
Yes.
But, I mean, the thing that I thought was kind of interesting about it, right? Because, I mean, it's not like these people liked each other. I mean, you know, even when I was growing up there in the 70s and 80s, you still had like all these ethnic jokes and stuff. So like these people didn't really necessarily like each other. They just had like this really huge enemy that for one day they got together and fought.
Well, I think that's much better
because they
than
weren't white.
Usual.
Oh, sorry.
No,
go ahead. Oh, but the thing that I think is kind of interesting about it, right, as far as race as being a social construct, is all these people. In 1978, they were white, but in 1923, they weren't.
Uh-huh.
So the Poles, the Irish, the Italians, Slovenians, Czechs, all these people were not white. And they got the brunt of what the Klan, had to offer. I mean, the Klan was still killing and terrorizing black folks too, but these people were, in effect, black as well. And that's what I thought was kind of interesting about that story.
That's a really interesting point, and it's one that I think about, actually, right? For personal reasons, right? My dad did some, genealogy research and learned that my grandmother was Jewish, right? Polish Jewish, Ashkenazi, right? And it's interesting in that, basically between that time and now, right, at some point, Jewish people became white in most of the world, right? But they weren't before that. So, and of course, the more extreme people out there, they never will be, right? So, how do you determine that, right? Slavic people weren't white a few years ago, right? And now they are, apparently. Like, it's an insane concept, and I wish it didn't exist. Because it exists, we have to deal with it, right? And recognize that it's a problem in that, it creates these divisions, and it, justifies quote unquote racism, right? Justifies in the quotes, right? So thank you for bringing that up. It is something I think about.
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting because, I mean, if you look at census data and stuff like that, like there are different groups that have slid in and out of whiteness, just depending on the political uses at the time or their numbers, right? Okay. And, and I think like Jews more than anybody understands that whiteness can be taken away with a quickness. Right?
Oh, yeah.
You're just like, hey, we thought we were German. And they're like, no. And, like all of a sudden your world changes. So like for me, that's kind of like why I did the project, was just sort of like, other than like, because they killed a Klansman like at the doorsteps of my church. like I never knew about that. So like I couldn't get that out of my head. But also it was just sort of like, look, you know, not only is it a construct, which we all now will admit, but it's something that can be granted and something that can be taken away.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And that is
so
why,
like maybe we need to like not think of it that way.
That's right. See, this is why every person should care, even if you're entirely self-motivated, even if you're selfish, right? And entirely about you should care about this. Right? For that whole reason of, well, first they came for the trade unionists and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a trade unionist, right? Yeah.
So that's kind of the project. And since not a lot was written about it, like there was like a lot of the actions in it, like when it comes from the immigrant side, right? Like nothing is said about it. So like, in the few places where it's written about, we can find the actions of like the burgess of the town and the police chief, and we can find the actions of the Klan. But as far as like who participated in the actual riot or you know, who actually fought back, it's like impossible because nobody talked.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was like a really interesting thing because the part of town, which yet again, I didn't know, and I went to school in this town, that was called Irish Town, right? That part of town. And when I went to the Historical Society, we were trying to map out where everybody lived at the time. And we thought we had it down, but then when I looked at the census data, it kind of didn't play out right. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of like, well, maybe it wasn't as segregated as we think. And there were like little pictures, like in Irish Town was the German Catholic Church, and even in 1908 there were like black kids who went to the German Catholic Church in Irish Town, right?
Right.
So it was all like, okay. And then the other weird thing was they marked where the black people lived in town, which, you know, I guess everybody always wants to know what we're up to. It's great. But they wouldn't say where everybody lived. They would only list the languages that people spoke. So, like, that's how I figured out, like, who actually lived there. And it was interesting because it was a lot more diverse than when I got there. So, like, you actually had people from, like, Libya and Armenia and Turkey living there. And there was one Chinese family who owned a laundry. That was kind of funny. And I used him because the kid name was George Washington Yee. So I had to use him. Yeah, but he was like 9 at the time of the riot, so I aged him up because I just wanted to use that. Because I mean, I'm the son of an immigrant, and there's just like nothing more immigrant than naming your kid George Washington. Like, I just like cracked me up.
Totally, I get you. 2 things, right? First of all, just some stuff in the chat. Right. There was a highlighted message earlier from Aaron Ree who said the best part of not killing your kids is they give you grandkids. Yeah. When you want to strangle them, you go, no, eventually they will have grandkids and, you know, then we can send them back to their parents when they're little monsters. Yeah. And True Undead Hero congratulated Kat Rambo on her nebula. So, you know, since she's one of the hosts of the podcast. So
congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and we have another highlighted message here. I saw a picture of the Communist Party HQ in Berlin in 1933. They had banners talking about UBI and desegregation, and the street in front of the building was packed. Interesting. Yeah. Right. A highlighted message, cool, people like spend their credit to say, right? So it's important that I mention them. Okay. Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to say is you mentioned that, you know, this is a thing about, you know, being brown in America, right? Being black in America. It's not just America. And I want people, our international listeners, to know that, right? I think Graeme will agree with me, right, that Canada has a much more insidious form of racism. We have a culture of politeness, right? I think it comes from the fact that, you know, the English and the French used to consider each other different races. They didn't talk to each other. And of course, the indigenous people here too had their own, you know, I mean, like it's reductionist to say they had their own thing, but they all had their individual own things and people didn't get along, right? So we're all polite to each other in public, and this is why we have a reputation for being polite. But what goes with that is you don't talk about the stuff that goes on beneath the surface. And racism,
talk about anything.
Yeah, pretty much, right? And racism is huge in Canada. It's a colonial culture, and it reflects it, right? Just this past week, I think it is, we had 2 murders by cops. One, no, I'm getting an echo somewhere. Sorry. Okay, I'll try to continue with the echo, but past 2 weeks, there were 2 murders by cops, 1 questionable death, and a blatant example of police brutality, all leveled against people of color, right? And, this is part of our legacy, European originated cultures and the colonialist age, which I believe we're still in, right? We talk about it like it's done, but it's not done, right? Right now, the empires are the United States, Russia, and China, but it's still a colonialist age, right?
And we don't even talk about well, for example, like right now there's protests happening in Vancouver on the viaduct about Hogan's Alley. It was a black community in Vancouver that was, much like Africville, it was destroyed in the name of urban renewal and building a viaduct. And there's, and they're it's things. These are things that were not taught in school and aren't talked about at all. Like Canada was so bad. Like the racism in Canada was so bad that in the 1950s. After World War II, after knowing what happened to the Jews who were in Europe at the hands of Nazi Germany, Canadian politicians were still saying things like, 1 Jew would have been too many to let into Canada.
Fact. Yep, that's absolutely true.
Like that's how bad.
Yeah. And we don't talk about that, but we're happy enough to talk about how, people came up to Canada through the Underground Railroad. Aren't we special,
Yeah.
Bill, did you have something to say?
Well, I was just thinking, this reminds me, boy, what was it? The Book of Negroes? God, I love that novel. So much. I learned so much about, Black Canadians, because, I'm half Jamaican, so I generally think, when I think of Black Canadians, I think of, Jamaicans.
There's a lot of Jamaican Canadians, absolutely.
Yeah. I can't help it. But, I think, racism is pervasive, because it's just a very useful tool, right? I know I've broken many Europeans' hearts, talking about European racism, the stuff that I experienced when I lived over there. And I remember when the whole Charlie Hebdo thing happened.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I told people, I'm like, well, I personally wouldn't go around killing people, but I lived there, and if we'd run into each other on the street back when I was 22, I might have taken a swing at a lot of those guys because I know the kind of stuff that they do. And I was talking to one sister who is fairly light, and when she lived in Paris, they thought she was Muslim. They thought she was Algerian or Moroccan or whatever. And she was like, yeah. I would beat all their asses all day, every day. And, I was deported and banned from the country for 7 years because I was willing to confront people way too much when I lived over there. So, I think the thing that's interesting about American racism is because America's rhetoric is just so lofty and so hypocritical, and that the way that they treat people is just so glaringly contradictory that it's always been highlighted. And I think that African Americans, maybe because of the rhetoric, have just always been fighting. Because when you look, at the height, we were only 20% of the country. And through most of these things, we've only been about 12 or 13%. And I don't know if there are that many minorities that small throughout world history who have been as like influential and loud and as we have, you know? And I think it's just because of that. Okay. Because of that sort of history that you just kind of have this history of resistance. It's like Bertolucci's 1900 at the end that De Niro and what's his name? The French guy. How they're fighting, like they're still fighting at the end. And that's like American blacks and whites. Like it's just like it just keeps for 400 years we've just been rolling around in the mud, just like trying to beat the shit out of each other just to like exist, I guess. Anyway, this isn't as hopeful as I wanted to be on, man. Sorry.
Hey, you know what, though? What's hopeful is that people are finally willing to engage with these uncomfortable topics, to admit that they existed and to commit to doing things and exist.
Yes, I do. Right? Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, and commit to doing something about it, something real, something that isn't a bunch of tokenism and, nonsense about changing hearts and minds. Okay, right? Now, how are we going to fix this broken system, right? How are we going to change things to make it better in a real and tangible way?
This is true.
Yep.
I would agree.
All right, everybody. We have to tie this up because we're out of time, more or less, but there is one question that we always ask all of our guests before we close up shop. So, Graeme, you were the first guest. We'll let you go first.
Okay. What is it? What's up?
What brings you hope right now in the middle of all this chaos?
Damn.
Good answer.
Just that I see more and more people pulling together. And I see people effectively using the tools that we have now to keep our problems and keep our situation in the public eye, even when the public eye is trying to turn away. Because there's something new and bright and shiny they want to look at. We're able to keep things in focus and keep striving for change.
That's cool. That's very cool.
Okay, Bill, same question.
I would piggyback on these last two statements, in all honesty. I think that having been in these circles for so long and now hearing all the different things that people have been saying for decades and being labeled as crazy or angry or whatever, like now they're on, like it's part of like the mainstream conversation. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would never have imagined even like 4 months ago some of the conversations that are taking place, like that they would be taking place in the mainstream. So that is really what gives me hope. It's that we are having these conversations. Because, I mean, this change is going to happen because the demographic shift that everybody voted for Trump for was afraid of, that already happened 10 years ago.
Yep.
So this country is going to be majority brown really soon. And the fact that we're having these conversations now and are trying to work it out gives me hope, because the alternative is horrific. So the fact that we're trying to actually hammer or at least approach these things now makes me optimistic, because I have children and I don't want them to live in that cyberpunk dystopia that we've been warned you about
Hell yeah.
for the last 40 years. So yes.
Hell yeah.
You got a website or something we can promote, Bill?
Well, there's rosariumpublishing.com.
Okay.
Especially if you're trying to buy APB, go through there. Because the proceeds go to the Innocence Project, so that would just, let Amazon not have their cut. But rosariumpublishing.com.
You're okay with that?
Yeah. You can see,
how do you spell that?
All the stuff that we do. Rosarium?
Yeah.
ROSA.
Okay.
RIUM.
RIUM. All right.
Let me also say, Rosarium has a special going on right now, too, until the end of the month.
We do. Way to go. Yes. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, 50% off our digital, our ebooks. If code word is Rosy Futures.
Yep.
Awesome.
Nice.
Okay, so let's do our giveaway. Alan, what have we got on the table today? And or do you want me to talk about the rules about the giveaway first?
Oh, yeah. Talk about the rules first, and then we'll do the giveaway, and then we'll tell everybody to send their money someplace.
There you go.
Go ahead.
Okay, so okay. Oh, I see what I did wrong. Okay, someone was saying the link isn't working, but I didn't make the P, but then Aaron fixed that for me. Okay, so we probably have a couple of new viewers, listeners this time because we have moved the channel, and some of these folks are my folks, right? So how it works is that we have like books, actual physical books that we will send on our dime. They're
in my hand right now.
Yeah, that's right, and they're speculative fiction genre books. Thank you for the posture check, True Undead Hero. That's something that, a Twitch thing. But yeah, check your posture, guys. Make sure you're not like sitting in a weird way. But how this works is that we're going to give these to someone for someone else, right? What we want you to do is we want you to nominate someone. You can do it here in the chat. You can do it on our Discord server. You can do it on our Twitter. You can send an email, right? Our Twitter is at if, _ separating all the words if this goes on, right? What's the email there, Alan?
Our email is itgo.don'tpanic@gmail.com. So that's ITGO don'tpanic@gmail.com.
Okay, awesome. And we have a nomination here already. Yeah, you nominate someone else that you think, you just want to do something nice for. You think they could use some cheering up. Maybe they're having a hard time. Maybe they're doing something you want to say thank you for. Just, whatever a speculative fiction fan in your life that you think deserves a present, right? And we will, if we get a bunch of entries, we'll draw randomly and we will send it to one of them.
And so here's what we got today. We've got issue 4 from Dreamforge magazine, which is the first Hope Punk science fiction magazine. We have Claiming Timo by Eugen Bacon, which, by the way, she's been nominated for a Nomo Award, if anyone's familiar.
Oh, nice.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And we also have Collision Stories by J.S. God help me with this last name. Brucalar.
Right, and sorry, who donated the books? Because we, shout out to the publishers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, I forgot. Well, Dreamforge is Dreamforge, and the 2 books are both from Meerkat Press.
Awesome. Oh, we have a question. Hope Punk, can you explain? Do you want me to take it?
Oh boy. Yeah, first of all, I would suggest going back and listening to our first episode where we talked to Alexandra Rowland, who's the person who coined that term. But generally speaking, our interpretation is mostly hope and resistance in narrative fiction, I guess. Narrative fiction.
Yeah, it's basically Hope Punk is a genre and a political movement. Right, and it's all about hope as as a conscious choice of resistance. Right, a way, even if everything seems dark, it's worth fighting for anyway. It's about working against these overwhelming forces and choosing hope and choosing positivity. Not that destructive positivity doesn't talk about negative stuff, but choosing to hope in the middle of all that darkness, right? So that's what Hope Punk's all about, and I love it. And
also, I think it's important to add, it's not cheesy hope; it's gritty punk rock hope.
Yeah, that's important. So, you're right, that is important.
It's important to me.
I put the address for our podcast in the chat, so our Twitch viewers can check that out if they would like to hear it.
Yep. So we have regular format episodes for those who are new to this that are more heavily edited. And then we've got the stream episodes that we have been doing since quarantine started. And those are kind of more live like this. You can find all of the old live episodes, except for one, which we lost, on our RSS feed. And you can find all those edited episodes as well. Couple notes before we go. If you want to support us, the best thing that you can do for us right now is spread the word, tell people about us, retweet us on Twitter, like us, subscribe to us, give us a review on iTunes, all of that kind of stuff. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm mostly on Twitter. Facebook, I'm kind of only there because I have to be. I'm kind of not in love with Facebook, really.
Nobody is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, totally true. I kind of just do what I have to do there. And then if you really, really want to contribute to us, you can find us at patreon.com/ifthisgoeson. But I will say that monetarily speaking, we're okay right now. Please donate to, Black Lives Matter or
the NAACP, something like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Something like that.
Support
we
the
are
fight
okay
for
on
racial
money.
justice, guys.
Yes. So, all of that being said, am I missing anything, Diane, or are we good to go?
I don't think so. Just shout out to Aaron Ree, who has been monitoring the stream for us and just a moment ago banned a spammer or something, and I appreciate that. We would not be able to do this without his help today, and I'm really appreciated. We have lots of nominations for books this time. I'm very happy about that.
Awesome.
Yes. Right. And where do we find you guys online, gentlemen? Bill and Graeme, where do we find you?
Well, I can be found on Twitter or Instagram and seldomly on Facebook as POC Gamer. Yeah, drop in. It's full of, I'm most active on Twitter, trying to be more active on Instagram, and Facebook is just where stuff is reposted from Twitter.
It's my Facebook too.
Yeah. Join me. All sorts of rants, art, fun stuff. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah, I guess for Twitter you can go Rosarium Bill if you want me, and then Rosarium Pub for the company. We have we're on Instagram. I don't know. I think it's the same on Instagram too. Rosarium Bill or like Rosarium_Bill.
Okay.
And then Facebook. Personally, I think it's Bill Campbell Author, and then we have a group page for Rosarium Publishing as well on Facebook. I think that's about it.
Right on.
Awesome. All right, so here goes the credits, and then we're good to go. If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by me with production by Sound Maiden. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower, and additional music is by Christopher Snydrosky, and outro music by some mysterious person named Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson. A special thanks to our guests, Bill Campbell and Graeme Barber. Thanks everybody for supporting us, and hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much, guys, for coming on. You were amazing.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Yeah, guys.
Yeah, thank you for having
Thanks so
us.
much.